My wife tried to hide her estranged father in our basement after he was evicted. When I found out, she claimed I wouldn't have agreed anyway. It all started a couple of weeks ago with small, unimportant things that, at the time, felt too silly to even mention. I noticed that some of the snacks we keep in the pantry kept disappearing faster than usual. Now, I don't want to sound petty here, but I'm a bit of a creature of habit. I buy the same box of granola bars every week, and I know exactly how many I eat, 2 per day. My wife isn't a fan of them. She calls them cardboard. So I just assumed I'd been eating more than I realized. But then it happened again the following week. I found myself standing in the kitchen, staring into the box, counting, like a total idiot, thinking, did I really eat 6 bars in 3 days? I brushed it off, but then something else happened. One night, I was lying in bed, scrolling my phone like usual, when I heard what I thought was faint shuffling downstairs. We live in a pretty quiet suburban neighborhood, so I'm not used to hearing random noises. At first I thought it was the house settling or maybe the wind, but the more I listened, the more it sounded like footsteps. Really slow, deliberate ones. I got up to check it out, but by the time I made it to the stairs, everything was quiet again. I turned on all the lights and even peeked into the basement, but nothing seemed out of place. My wife joked that I was getting paranoid from all the true crime podcasts I listened to, and honestly, I kind of agreed. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. A couple of days later, I went into the basement to grab a screwdriver from my toolkit, and that's when I noticed it, the smell. You know how basements sometimes have that faintly damp, musty smell? This wasn't that. This was stronger, like sweat and stale air. I even said to my wife, "Do you think there's mold or something down there?" She shrugged it off, saying, "It's probably just the old carpet." And that was the end of it. But then something happened that I couldn't ignore. I went down to the basement again, and this time, I found a blanket folded neatly on the floor. Now, here's the thing. We don't keep blankets in the basement. There's no reason to. We don't have a guest room down there or anything. It's just an unfinished space where we store holiday decorations, tools, and random junk we don't use often. I asked my wife about it and she acted like I was making a big deal out of nothing. "Oh, that's probably just an old blanket I forgot to take upstairs," she said, not even looking up from her phone. But something about her tone didn't sit right with me. It was too casual, like she was trying a little too hard not to care. At this point, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something going on. The disappearing food, the noises, the smell, the blanket, it all started adding up in my head, but I still didn't know what it added up to. I even started second-guessing myself, wondering if I was just imagining things. Maybe I was eating more snacks than usual. Maybe the noises were in my head. Maybe the smell really was the carpet. I felt like one of those characters in a horror movie who ignores all the warning signs until it's too late. But then, last night, something happened that I couldn't explain away. I was sitting in the living room after dinner, scrolling on my phone when I noticed my wife sneaking out to the garage with a large grocery bag. At first I didn't think much of it. Maybe she was putting something in the freezer or throwing something out, but when she came back inside, she was empty-handed. I asked her what she was doing, and she looked startled for a second before saying, "Oh, just cleaning up a bit." That answer didn't make sense, but I didn't press her on it. Instead, I waited until she went to bed and decided to check the garage myself. The bag was gone. Whatever she'd taken out there, she'd moved it. And that's when it hit me. What if someone else is living here? It sounded insane, even in my own head, but I couldn't think of any other explanation. I thought about checking the basement again, but honestly, I was too freaked out. The idea of going down there, alone, in the dark, and finding someone, or something, made my skin crawl. So I told myself I'd deal with it in the morning. And now here I am, sitting in my car, typing this out while my wife is at work. I haven't gone down to the basement yet, but I know I have to. I just don't know what I'll find. And frankly, I'm not sure I want to know. Update. Hey Reddit, I wasn't planning on posting again so soon, but a lot has happened, and I honestly don't know how to process it. Well, last night, I finally decided to investigate. And let me just say, I wasn't prepared for what I found. I woke up yesterday determined to figure out what was going on. My wife seemed totally fine, like, annoyingly fine. She was humming while she made her coffee, chatting about some work drama, and asking me what I wanted for dinner like everything was perfectly normal. It threw me off because she had been acting a little nervous and distracted for the past couple of weeks, but now it was like a switch had flipped. It felt like she was overcompensating. Like she knew I was onto something and was trying way too hard to act casual. At one point, she said, "Oh, by the way, I'm going to run a couple of errands after work tonight. Nothing big, just some stuff I've been putting off." The way she said it felt rehearsed, but I just nodded and said, "Sounds good." Internally, I was thinking, this is it. Tonight's the night I figure out what's going on. After my wife left for work, I went about my day as usual, but I couldn't focus on anything. Every time I walked past the basement door, I felt this nagging pull, like it was daring me to open it. Around lunchtime, I decided I couldn't wait any longer. I grabbed a flashlight, took a deep breath and headed downstairs. The first thing I noticed was how quiet it was, like, too quiet. Normally, there's at least some ambient noise from the water heater or the fridge upstairs, but it felt dead silent, which made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The smell was still there, faint but unmistakable, and it was stronger the closer I got to the far corner of the basement. That's when I saw it, a makeshift sleeping area tucked behind some old furniture we'd been meaning to donate. There was an air mattress, a pile of blankets, and a small stack of empty food containers. It was all hidden just well enough that you wouldn't notice it unless you were looking for it, but once you saw it, it was impossible to ignore. My heart was racing at this point. I kept thinking, this can't be real. There's no way this is actually happening. I didn't know what to do, so I just sat on the stairs for a while, staring at the setup and trying to piece everything together. My first thought was to call my wife and demand an explanation, but I decided to wait until she got home. I wanted to see her reaction in person. I wanted to know if she'd lie to my face or finally come clean. When she got home later that evening, I was sitting in the living room, trying to act as normal as possible. She walked in, gave me a quick kiss and started unpacking her grocery bags. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, but I forced myself to stay calm. After a few minutes, I said, "Hey, can we talk for a second?" She looked up at me, and for a split second I thought I saw panic flash across her face. "Sure," she said, setting down a bag of produce. "What's up?" I didn't waste any time. "Who's been living in our basement?" Her reaction was immediate. She froze, her hand still resting on the counter, and her face went pale. For a moment, I thought she was going to deny it, but instead, she let out this shaky sigh and said, "I was hoping you wouldn't notice." Turns out, it's her father. Her estranged father, the one she hasn't spoken to in years because of some family drama she's never gone into detail about. Apparently, he got evicted a few weeks ago and showed up at our house unannounced, looking for help. She didn't want to tell me because she knew I wouldn't agree to let him stay, and didn't want to deal with the argument. So instead, she decided to hide him in the basement and sneak him food while I was at work or asleep. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I was angry, of course. I felt completely blindsided and betrayed. But more than that, I was confused. Why didn't she just talk to me? Why did she think it was okay to hide this from me in our house? I asked her all of this, but she just kept saying, "You wouldn't have understood. You would have said no." We argued for hours. She kept insisting that she didn't have a choice, that he had nowhere else to go and she couldn't just turn him away. I kept pointing out that she lied to me, that she made a huge decision without consulting me, and that she put us both in an incredibly uncomfortable situation. It was like we were speaking two different languages. Neither of us could get the other to see our side. At the end of the night, I told her he has to leave. I know that sounds harsh, but I can't have someone living in my house without my knowledge or consent, even if it's her father. She begged me to give him more time, just a week or two to figure something out, but I said no. I feel bad for the guy, but this isn't my responsibility. She keeps saying I'm being unfair and heartless, but I feel like she's the one who crossed the line. Final update. Hey Reddit. This is going to be my last update because everything has finally come to a head. I'm exhausted, emotionally drained, and honestly, I still don't know how I feel about everything. Here's what happened next. The morning after our argument, things were tense. My wife and I barely spoke to each other as we went through the motions of getting ready for the day. She had this look on her face that I couldn't quite place, somewhere between guilt and defiance. It was clear she wasn't on board with my decision, but I figured we'd revisit the conversation later when we'd both had time to cool down. I left for work, but something didn't sit right with me. I kept replaying our argument in my head, and one specific thing she said kept bothering me. "He has nowhere else to go." It sounded so absolute, like she'd already decided for both of us that this was his only option. That's when I realized I needed to know more about this man, this stranger living in my basement, eating my food, and complicating my marriage. I knew bits and pieces of his story, but only what my wife had told me over the years, and even those details were vague. I decided to do a little digging. On my lunch break, I called my wife's sister. We're not super close, but we get along well enough, and I figured she might have some insight. As soon as I mentioned their dad, her tone shifted. She let out this long sigh and said, "What's he done now?" That one sentence told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't the first time he'd been in trouble. She filled in a lot of blanks. Turns out, their dad has a long history of burning bridges. He's been evicted multiple times, borrowed money he never paid back, and even lived with my wife's sister for a few months before she finally kicked him out because he was bringing sketchy people around her kids. "He's not a bad guy," she said. "But he's selfish. He always makes his problems someone else's." I asked her if my wife had mentioned anything about him living in our basement, and she paused for a long time before saying, "No, but I'm not surprised." She sounded genuinely concerned, but also exhausted, like she'd given up trying to deal with him years ago. When I hung up, I felt a mix of anger and sadness. My wife wasn't just hiding her dad from me, she was hiding who he really was. I started to see things more clearly. This wasn't just about her trying to help a family member in need. This was about her guilt, her unresolved feelings about their relationship, and her trying to fix something that probably couldn't be fixed. That night, I came home ready to lay everything on the table. My wife was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables like nothing had happened, but I could tell she was on edge. I told her we needed to talk, and she immediately got defensive. "If this is about my dad again, I don't want to hear it," she said. But I pushed forward anyway. I told her everything her sister had told me. I told her I understood why she felt responsible for her dad, but that it wasn't fair to put me in this position without my consent. I told her I couldn't live like this, constantly wondering what else she might be hiding from me. "This isn't just about your dad," I said. "This is about us. This is about trust." She didn't say anything for a long time. Finally, she looked at me and said, "I didn't think it would get this bad." I asked her what she meant, and that's when she admitted that her dad wasn't planning on leaving anytime soon. "He doesn't have a plan," she said. "He's just here. I don't know what to do." That was my breaking point. I told her, calmly but firmly, that he had to leave by the end of the week. "No extensions, no excuses. If you want to help him, fine," I said. "But not here. Not like this." She started crying and accused me of being cold and heartless, but I stood my ground. I told her I wasn't willing to sacrifice our marriage for a man who had already ruined so many other relationships in his life. The next few days were a blur. My wife avoided me as much as possible, and I avoided the basement entirely. I didn't want to see him, and honestly, I didn't trust myself to stay calm if I did. By Friday, my wife told me she'd arranged for him to stay with a friend temporarily. I didn't ask for details, I was just relieved he'd be gone. When he finally left, it felt like a weight had been lifted off my chest, but it was clear things between my wife and me weren't the same. We had this huge gaping wound in our relationship, and neither of us knew how to start healing it. She apologized for lying to me, but it felt half-hearted, like she still thought she'd been justified. And maybe she did. Maybe in her mind, she was just doing what she thought was right. But for me, it was hard to move past the fact that she didn't trust me enough to even have the conversation.